Picture a medieval dungeon, a woman trembling as a sinister iron claw, glowing red-hot, looms before her ready to punish her for a crime she didn't commit. This is the horrifying reality of the Breast Ripper, Chapter 1, Unveiling the Beast. What was the Breast Ripper? Let's dive right into the heart of this nightmare. The Breast Ripper, also known grimly as the Iron Spider or Spanish Spider, was a medieval torture instrument specifically crafted for women. Emerging prominently during the 16th to 18th centuries in parts of Europe, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire and regions under the influence of the Inquisition. Picture this: a handheld device resembling a large iron claw with 4 sharp curved prongs at the end, attached to a handle that allowed the torturer to grip and pull with brutal force. It wasn't just any cloth. Prongs were often heated over flames until they glowed red-hot, adding searing pain to the already unimaginable agony. Historically, this tool was reserved for women accused of crimes deemed feminine sins, like adultery, abortion, or even miscarriage, which was sometimes twisted into infanticide. The punishment was as symbolic as it was sadistic. It targeted the breasts seen in patriarchal societies as symbols of motherhood and femininity, ripping them apart to publicly shame and destroy the victim's identity as a woman. Records from the era, such as those from the Bamberg witch trials in the 1620s, describe how executioners would clamp the device onto the breast, twist, and yank, often repeating the process on both sides until flesh was torn away, leading to profuse bleeding, infection, and frequently death. One infamous case involved a woman named Maria Hall in 1631, who endured similar tortures during witch hunts, though she survived multiple sessions before being exonerated, highlighting the device's role in extracting false confessions. But why? Was it so effective? Practically speaking, the design maximized pain with minimal effort. The prongs could penetrate deeply, and heating them cauterized wounds partially, prolonging suffering without immediate death. Examples abound in museums today, like replicas in the Torture Museum in Amsterdam, showing variations with spiked interiors or chains for added leverage. If you're visualizing this, it's meant to shock. That's the point of understanding history's dark side, to appreciate how far we've come in human rights. Chapter 2. Roots of Cruelty. The Origins of the Breast Ripper. Step back into the grim shadows of medieval Europe to uncover where this horrific device came from. The Breast Ripper didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was born in a world steeped in fear, superstition, and rigid control over women's bodies. The late Middle Ages, roughly from the 1400s onward, were a time when the Catholic Church and secular authorities were obsessed with enforcing moral purity, especially among women. This was the era of the Inquisition, witch hunts, in a society that viewed women's sexuality as both dangerous and sacred. The Breast Ripper emerged as a tool to punish those who stepped outside the strict boundaries of acceptable behavior, particularly in regions like Germany, France, and Spain, where religious fervor and patriarchal power collided. The device's origins are tied to the broader culture of public punishment. Torture wasn't just about pain, it was theater, meant to terrify communities into submission. Women accused of crimes like adultery or heresy weren't just criminals, they were seen as threats to the social order. Historical records point to the Breast Ripper's use peaking during the 16th and 17th centuries, especially in areas gripped by witch trials. For example, in Bavaria, executioners' manuals from the 1500s describe tools like the Breast Ripper as standard for crimes against nature. Its design likely evolved from earlier torture devices, like pincers used in Roman times, but was adapted to target women specifically. Reflecting the era's fixation on controlling female bodies, some historians suggest it was inspired by agricultural tools, like shears for shearing sheep. It's twisted into something far more sinister. What made the Breast Ripper particularly chilling was its psychological impact. The act of mutilating a woman's breasts wasn't random, it was a deliberate attack on her identity as a mother and nurturer, stripping away her dignity in front of jeering crowds. Court documents from places like Augsburg in the 1600s detail how women, often innocent, were subjected to this to extract confessions or simply to cleanse their supposed sins. One practical tip for understanding this: Look at surviving woodcuts from the period, like those in German broadsheets, which depict the device in action, gruesome illustrations meant to warn others. These images, while disturbing, show how the breast ripper was as much a propaganda tool as a physical one. This glimpse into its origins leads us to the grim reality of how it was used in practice, which we'll explore next. Chapter 3. The Mechanics of Terror. How the breast ripper was used. Now, that we've uncovered the dark origins of the breast ripper, let's explore the chilling details of how it was actually used. This wasn't a device wielded in secret. It was a public spectacle, designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. The process began with the accused woman, often bound and stripped, being brought before a crowd, sometimes in a town square or a grim dungeon. The executioner, usually a man trained in the art of torture, would brandish the breast ripper, its iron prongs gleaming in the torchlight, or worse, glowing red from being heated in a fire. The goal wasn't just to punish, but to break the victim, physically and emotionally. While sending a stark warning to everyone watching, the procedure was brutally straightforward. The executioner would clamp the prongs around the woman's breast, the sharp tips digging into flesh. With a twist or pull, the device would tear through skin and tissue, causing excruciating pain and severe bleeding. Historical accounts, like those from the Würzburg witch trials in the 1620s, describe how the process could be repeated multiple times, sometimes on both breasts, to prolong the suffering. If the prongs were heated, the burns added another layer of agony, often leading to infections that could kill days later. The device's design was practical in its cruelty. The prongs were spaced to grip firmly without slipping, and the handle gave the torturer leverage to rip with force. Some versions, as seen in artifacts from the Freiburg torture collection, had spikes inside the claws for extra damage. The breast ripper wasn't just about physical pain, it was a tool of control. Women accused of crimes like abortion or infidelity were often tortured in front of their communities, or screams meant to deter others. For example, a 1599 case in Munich documented a woman enduring this punishment for alleged adultery, with the executioner pausing to let the crowd jeer, amplifying her shame. Practically, the device was easy to use. No complex machinery, just raw force and intent. If you're trying to picture this, think of a blacksmith's tongs, but weaponized to destroy rather than create. This grim reality sets the stage for why such a device was reserved for women, which we'll dive into next. Chapter 4. Targeting Women. Why the breast ripper was gender-specificity. Let's dive into the unsettling question of why the breast ripper was designed specifically for women. This wasn't a random choice. It was a deliberate reflection of the deeply patriarchal societies of medieval and early modern Europe, where women's bodies were both revered and tightly controlled. The breast ripper targeted the breasts because they symbolized femininity, motherhood, and nurturing qualities that the era's authorities often sought to regulate or punish when they believed women had strayed. By attacking this part of the body, the punishment was not only physical, but also a profound assault on a woman's identity and social role. In the 16th and 17th centuries, women faced intense scrutiny for behaviors deemed immoral or rebellious. Crimes like adultery, abortion, or even being suspected of witchcraft could land a woman in the torturer's grip. The breast ripper was used to punish acts seen as betrayals of a woman's natural role as a chaste wife or mother. For instance, during the Trier witch trials of the 1580s, women accused of causing miscarriages, often through baseless claims of sorcery, faced this torture. The device's use was documented in trial records, which describe how it was applied to correct women who defied societal norms. The symbolism was clear: destroy the physical embodiment of femininity to restore order. Practically, the breast ripper's gender-specific design made it a tool of both punishment and spectacle. Unlike general torture devices like the rack, which were used on men and women alike, this instrument was crafted to exploit cultural views about women's bodies. It was often used publicly, as seen in cases from the 1600s in Nuremberg, where women endured it in market squares to maximize shame. The psychological impact was devastating, as survivors were left scarred, both physically and socially, often ostracized by their communities. If you're trying to grasp the mindset behind this, consider how even today, societal judgments about women's bodies persist. Though thankfully without such barbaric tools, this focus on gender leads us to explore the broader context of the societies that embrace this punishment, which we'll uncover next. Chapter 5. A culture of fear. The societies that embraced the breast ripper let step into the world that allowed a device as horrific as the breast ripper to thrive. Picture Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, towns shrouded in suspicion, where the church and state held iron grips over daily life. This was a time of religious upheaval, with the Catholic Inquisition and Protestant witch hunts fueling paranoia. Societies were obsessed with purging sin, and women, often seen as the weaker, more temptable sex, were prime targets. The breast ripper wasn't just a tool. It was a product of a culture that feared women's autonomy and punished it with extreme cruelty. In places like Germany, Spain, and France, the fear of witchcraft and moral decay was rampant. Women who didn't fit the mold, widows, healers, or those who spoke out, were easily accused of crimes like heresy or adultery. The breast ripper was used in regions like Bavaria, where witch trials in the 1620s saw hundreds of women tortured. Court records from Bamberg describe how women were subjected to the device to prove their guilt. Often after baseless accusations from neighbors, the public nature of these punishments was key. A woman's suffering was a lesson to others, reinforcing the idea that stepping out of line had brutal consequences. For example, in 1611, a woman named Anna Spengler in Augsburg was tortured with the breast ripper for alleged abortion. Her punishment detailed in local chronicles to deter others. This culture of fear wasn't just about religion, it was about control. Women's roles were strictly defined, and any deviation was a threat to the social order. The breast ripper, with its focus on destroying symbols of femininity, was a perfect weapon for this mindset. Practically, it was cheap and portable, making it a favorite among executioners who traveled between towns. If you imagine the atmosphere, think of a community gathered in a town square, watching in horror or grim approval as the device was used, their silence ensuring compliance. This grim backdrop sets us up to explore the real stories of the women who endured this punishment, which we'll dive into next. Chapter 6. Voices from the Shadows, Stories of the Victims Now. Let's turn our focus to the women who faced the breast ripper, their stories etched in the margins of history. These weren't just faceless victims, they were mothers, daughters, and neighbors, often caught in a web of false accusations and societal paranoia. The breast ripper wasn't just a tool of pain, it was a weapon that silenced women, leaving behind tales of resilience and tragedy. By piecing together historical records, trial documents, and rare survivor accounts, we can bring their experiences to light, giving voice to those who suffered in the darkest corners of medieval Europe. Imagine a woman like Elizabeth Strupp. A midwife in Cologne in the late 1580s, Elizabeth was known for her skill in delivering babies. But when a newborn died during a difficult birth, whispers of witchcraft spread. Trial records from the Cologne archives describe how she was dragged before a tribunal, accused of causing the death through sorcery. The breast ripper was used to extract a confession, its iron prongs heated over a brazier until they glowed. Elizabeth endured 2 sessions, each time the executioner clamping the device onto her chest, twisting until blood soaked her clothing. The pain was unimaginable, yet she refused to confess, insisting on her innocence. Her case, documented in a 1589 court ledger, notes that she survived the torture but was left permanently scarred, both physically and socially, shunned by her community. Her story is one of countless others where women faced this device for crimes they often didn't commit. Another haunting case comes from the Würzburg witch trials of Itzenloh-bei-Arschetzi, where a young woman named Marguerite Schaefer, barely 20, was accused of adultery after a neighbor claimed she'd been unfaithful. Marguerite's trial transcript, preserved in the Würzburg State Archives, details how the breast ripper was applied in a public square, with a crowd gathered to witness her punishment. The executioner used a cold version of the device first, tearing flesh with slow, deliberate pulls before heating it for a second round. Marguerite's screams echoed through the square, but no confession came. The records note she died days later from infection, a common fate for victims, as the wounds were rarely treated. These public displays weren't just about punishing the individual, they were meant to terrify other women into submission. The breast rippers' use varied by region. But the stories share a pattern: women targeted for defying societal norms, whether through their work, their words, or simply bad luck. In some cases, like that of Anna Maria Schweglin in 1775, one of the last documented uses in Germany, the device was used to punish abortion, a charge often leveled without evidence. Anna's case, found in Bavarian court documents, shows she was tortured in a dungeon the breast ripper applied until she fainted from blood loss. She survived long enough to be banished, but her life was irreparably broken. Practically, the device's effectiveness lay in its simplicity: portable, easy to wield, and devastatingly effective at causing pain without requiring much skill. Museums like the Rothenburg Torture Museum display replicas showing the crude but brutal design that made it so feared. These stories aren't easy to hear, but they remind us of the human cost of unchecked power. If you're picturing this, imagine the courage it took for these women to face such horror, often with no one to defend them. Their experiences paved the way for us to explore the broader wave of witch hunts that fueled the breast ripper's use, which we'll uncover next. Chapter 7. The Witch Hunt Connection. Fueling the breast ripper's rainlets, plunge into the chaotic world of witch hunts, where the breast ripper found its most notorious stage. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Europe was gripped by a feverish panic over witchcraft, a fear that turned neighbors into accusers and women into scapegoats. Now, this wasn't just superstition run wild. It was a deadly mix of religious zeal, social unrest, and legal systems that gave torturers like those wielding the breast ripper free rein. The device became a chilling symbol of the era's obsession with purging evil from women's bodies, and its use during witch trials reveals the depths of cruelty. It's justified by paranoia. Witch hunts swept through regions like Germany, France, and the Low Countries, with places like Bamberg and Würzburg becoming infamous for their brutality. The breast ripper was a favored tool in these trials, used to extract confessions from women accused of consorting with the devil or casting spells. Take the case of the Bamberg witch trials from 1626 to 1631, where over 1,000 people, mostly women, were executed. Trial records detail how women like Barbara Schwartz, a local healer, were subjected to the breast ripper after being accused of causing crop failures. The executioner would clamp the heated prongs onto her chest, twisting and pulling while interrogators demanded she name other witches. Barbara's confession, recorded in a 1628 document, was likely coerced through this agony, as the pain was unbearable, and many confessed to anything to make it stop. Tragically, her confession led to more arrests, creating a vicious cycle. Device's role in witch hunts was practical yet perverse. Its portability made it ideal for traveling inquisitors who carried it to remote villages. The psychological terror was as potent as the physical pain. Women knew that refusing to confess could mean prolonged torture. While confessing often led to death by burning, Trier, Germany, during the 1580s, records show the breast ripper used on women accused of causing miscarriages, branded as witchcraft. One woman, Agnes Sampson, endured the device for hours, her screams documented as proof of her guilt, though no evidence supported the charges. The public nature of these tortures, often in town squares, amplified their impact, with crowds watching as a warning to conform. If you're visualizing this, picture a terrified woman, bound and exposed, surrounded by a crowd that believed her suffering was divine justice. The breast ripper's prominence in witch hunts wasn't just about punishment, it was about reinforcing control over women in a time of fear. Surviving artifacts like those in the Salzburg Witch Trial Museum show the device's crude but effective design, with prongs crafted to maximize pain. This connection to witch hunts sets the stage for exploring how these punishments were justified, which we'll dive into next. Chapter 8. Justifying the horror, the twisted logic behind the breast ripper. Let's peel back the layers of the chilling mindset that allowed a device as gruesome as the breast Ripper to be seen as a legitimate tool of justice. In the medieval and early modern periods, Europe was a world where fear, faith, and power intertwined to create a society that not only tolerated but embraced extreme punishments. The breast ripper wasn't an aberration, it was a product of a carefully constructed rationale that framed the mutilation of women's bodies as necessary to protect the moral and social order. To understand this, we need to dive into the religious, legal, and cultural beliefs that justified such cruelty, revealing how deeply ingrained prejudice and control shaped the lives of women accused of defying the norms of their time. The primary justification for the breast ripper came from a religious worldview that saw women as inherently susceptible to sin. In the 16th and 17th centuries, both Catholic and Protestant authorities leaned heavily on biblical narratives, particularly the story of Eve's temptation in the Garden of Eden, to argue that women were morally weak and prone to leading men astray. This belief was weaponized during the height of the Inquisition and witch hunts, where women accused of crimes like adultery, abortion, or witchcraft were viewed as threats to divine order. The breast ripper, by targeting the breast symbols of motherhood and femininity, was seen as a fitting punishment. It wasn't just about inflicting pain, it was about correcting a woman's deviation from her prescribed role as a chaste wife or mother. For example, ecclesiastical courts in places like Cologne in the 1590s often cited religious texts to justify torturing women accused of unnatural acts, claiming the breast ripper purified their souls by destroying their sinful flesh, legally. The use of torture was codified in many parts of Europe, giving the breast ripper an unsettling stamp of approval. The Constitutio Criminalis Carolina of 1532, a legal code in the Holy Roman Empire, explicitly allowed torture for serious crimes, including those tied to morality or heresy. This gave executioners and judges free rein to use devices like the breast ripper, especially in cases where confessions were needed to confirm guilt. Trial records from Mainz in the 1590s describe a woman named Ursula Becker, accused of abortion after a miscarriage. The court ordered the breast ripper to extract a confession, with the judge noting that her suffering was necessary to reveal the truth. Ursula's case, detailed in a surviving ledger, shows how the device was applied twice, once cold, then heated until she confessed, though later evidence suggested her miscarriage was natural. This wasn't about justice. It was about forcing compliance through pain. It's justified as a means to uphold law and order. The public nature of these punishments added another layer to their twisted logic. The breast ripper was often used in town squares or market halls, turning torture into a spectacle. This served a dual purpose, punishing the individual and terrifying the community into submission. In Nuremberg, during the 1600s, chroniclers describe women tortured with the breast ripper in front of crowds, with priests or local officials preaching that their pain was a warning against sin. One case involved a woman named Gretel Müller. Accused of adultery in 1613, her punishment, recorded in a local broadsheet, was carried out publicly, with the executioner pausing between applications to let the crowd jeer, reinforcing the idea that her suffering was deserved. The psychological impact was deliberate. Women watching knew that any perceived misstep could land them in the same position, silencing dissent and enforcing conformity. Culturally, the breast ripper's use was rooted in a deep-seated misogyny that viewed women's bodies as both sacred and dangerous. The breasts, as symbols of nurturing, were paradoxically targeted to shame and dehumanize. This wasn't unique to the breast ripper. Other devices, like the vaginal pair, followed similar logic, but its focus on a visible gendered feature made it particularly symbolic. If you're trying to visualize this mindset, imagine a society so obsessed with control that it saw mutilating a woman's body as a righteous act, a way to restore balance in a world they believed was teetering on the edge of chaos. Surviving woodcuts from the period, like those in German archives, depict women bound and tortured with the breast ripper, often with captions praising the executioner's justice. These images were circulated to reinforce the message, "Step out of line, and this is your fate." Yet even in this dark era, there were glimmers of dissent. Some clergy and scholars questioned the morality of such brutal methods. In the 1580s, a Jesuit priest in Augsburg, Father Johann Keller, wrote a rare critique, preserved in church records, arguing that tortures like the breast ripper were more about cruelty than divine will. His voice was a minority, drowned out by the fervor of the time, but it hints at the cracks in the system that would later widen. The breast ripper's justification relied on a fragile logic fear of women's power, faith in divine punishment, and trust in confessions extracted through agony. When these foundations began to crumble, the device's days were numbered. Practically, the breast ripper was chillingly effective for its purpose. Its simple design for iron prongs on a handle required little skill to wield, and its portability made it a favorite among traveling executioners. Museums like the Freiburg Torture Collection display replicas, showing how the prongs were crafted to grip and tear with precision, often with added spikes for extra damage. If you're curious to explore this further, look into digital archives, like those from the University of Heidelberg, which offer translated trial records that detail the device's use. These documents paint a vivid picture of a world where pain was a tool of control, justified by a society desperate to maintain its rigid order. This warped rationale, blending faith, law, and fear, kept the breast ripper in use for centuries. But as Europe began to question these brutal practices, the device's end was near. This sets the stage for exploring how its use finally faded, which we'll uncover next. Chapter 9. The Decline of the Device. Why the breast ripper faded away. Let step into the twilight of the breast ripper's grim reign. A period when this horrific device began to vanish from the torture chambers and town squares of Europe. By the late 18th century, the breast ripper, once a feared symbol of punishment for women, was fading into obscurity. Its decline wasn't driven by a sudden wave of compassion, but by a slow, complex shift in ideas, laws, and societal values that challenged the brutal practices of the past. To understand why this instrument of terror fell out of use, we need to explore the intellectual, legal, and cultural changes that reshaped Europe, alongside the practical reasons that made such devices outdated. This chapter uncovers how a new era began to reject the cruelty of the breast ripper, setting the stage for a less barbaric, if still flawed, approach to justice. The Enlightenment, a movement that swept through Europe in the 1700s, was the spark that began to dismantle the foundations of torture. Thinkers like Cesare Beccaria, whose 1764 treatise on crimes and punishments became a cornerstone of legal reform, argued that torture was not only cruel, but ineffective. Beccaria's work, widely read across Europe, questioned the morality of devices like the breast ripper, asserting that they produced false confessions and dehumanized both victim and society. His ideas resonated with rulers like Frederick the Great of Prussia, who in 1740 banned judicial torture, including the use of gender-specific devices in his territories. Court records from Berlin show that by the 1750s, magistrates were instructed to rely on evidence rather than pain, marking a significant shift. For example, a 1754 Prussian edict explicitly prohibited tools like the breast ripper, citing their barbarous nature. This wasn't universal; some regions lagged behind, but it set a precedent that spread. The decline of witch hunts, which had been the breast ripper's primary stage, was another critical factor. The 17th century's witch trial frenzy, particularly in places like Bamberg and Würzburg, had fueled the device's use, with women tortured for supposed pacts with the devil. By the mid-1700s, skepticism about witchcraft was growing. The last major witch trial in Germany, in Würzburg, in 1870, marked a turning point. As communities and courts began to question the validity of accusations, the need for tools like the breast ripper waned. Trial records from the period show fewer cases involving torture for feminine crimes like abortion or adultery, as legal systems shifted toward more standardized punishments. For instance, a 1775 case in Bavaria involving Anna Maria Schweglin, one of the last documented uses of the breast ripper, was noted as an outlier, with local authorities criticized for clinging to outdated methods. Cultural shifts also played a role in the device's demise. The Enlightenment brought a growing emphasis on human dignity, even for women who had long been scapegoats for society's fears. The breast ripper's focus on mutilating female bodies became harder to justify. As ideas about gender and morality evolved, in France, the Revolution of 1789 accelerated this change. With post-revolutionary laws in the 1790s abolishing torture in favor of executions by guillotine. Seen as quicker and less sadistic, French legal records from 1791 showed torture devices, including those resembling the breast ripper, being decommissioned as relics of a savage past. If you're picturing this, imagine dusty torture chambers being cleared out, their tools replaced by courtrooms where, while still imperfect, evidence began to outweigh coerced confessions. Practically, the breast ripper was becoming obsolete. Its simplicity for iron prongs on a handle had made it a favorite for traveling executioners. But newer judicial systems favored imprisonment, fines, or exile over public mutilation. The device's gender-specific design, so tied to punishing feminine sins, lost relevance as legal codes became less focused on moral crimes. In England, where torture was less common, the influence of common law meant devices like the breast ripper were rarely used, and this model spread to other regions. By the early 1800s, even rural areas, which had clung to old practices, began adopting these changes. For example, a 1803 case in a small Austrian village noted the breast ripper's use as archaic, with a local magistrate opting for a prison sentence instead, as recorded in regional archives. The decline wasn't instantaneous, and resistance lingered in conservative pockets. In some German states, executioners continued using torture devices into the early 19th century, especially in remote areas where Enlightenment ideas were slow to penetrate. Museum collections, like those in Vienna's Criminal Museum, preserve these relics, their rusted prongs a testament to a fading era. Visitors today can see replicas, often displayed with plaques explaining their obsolescence, stark contrast to their once feared presence. If you're curious to explore further, digital archives like those from the University of Trier offer translated trial records that show the gradual decline in torture cases. Providing a window into this transition, the breast ripper's fade from history wasn't just a practical shift, it was a sign of society beginning to grapple with its own cruelty. While the device itself disappeared, its legacy lingered in the scars it left on communities and the lessons it imparted about unchecked power. This sets the stage for our final reflection on the lasting impact of this punishment, which we'll explore next. Chapter 10: Echoes of Pain. The lasting legacy of the breast ripper as we reach the final chapter of this grim journey. Let's reflect on the enduring impact of the breast ripper and what its existence tells us about history and humanity. This device, though no longer in use by the early 19th century, left scars not just on the women it tortured, but on the collective memory of society. Its legacy is a haunting reminder of how fear, power, and prejudice can twist justice into something monstrous. By exploring the long-term effects, the lessons we've learned, and the echoes of this cruelty in modern times, we can better understand why confronting this dark history matters for our present and future. The breast ripper's physical legacy lives on in the artifacts preserved in museums across Europe, like the Torture Museum in Amsterdam or the Medieval Crime Museum in Rothenburg. These rusted iron claws, often displayed alongside other torture devices, draw gasps from visitors, their spiked prongs a stark symbol of a time when women's bodies were weaponized against them. But beyond the physical relics, the device's impact lingers in the stories of its victims. Pieced together from trial records and chronicles, women like Elizabeth Strupp or Marguerite Schaefer, whose lives were shattered by accusations of witchcraft or immorality, represent countless others whose voices were silenced. Their suffering, documented in archives like those in Würzburg or Cologne, shows the human cost of unchecked power. For instance, the Bamberg witch trials of the 1620s left entire communities fractured, with families torn apart and trust eroded. As neighbors turned on each other under the shadow of the breast ripper and similar tortures, the psychological and social scars were profound. Survivors, if they lived through the ordeal, often faced ostracism. Take Anna Maria Schweglin, tortured in 1775 for alleged abortion, her banishment from her Bavarian village, detailed in court records, meant a life of isolation, her body and spirit broken. The public nature of these punishments amplified their impact, embedding fear in women across generations. Practically, the breast ripper's design, simple, portable, and brutally effective, made it a tool of terror that shaped societal norms. It reinforced the idea that women's bodies were subject to control, a message that lingered even as the device itself faded. If you're picturing this, imagine a woman walking through her town years later. Her scars hidden, but her fear of speaking out ever present, a silent legacy of the device's cruelty yet. The breast ripper's story also holds lessons of progress. Its decline, driven by Enlightenment ideas and legal reforms, marked a slow shift toward valuing human dignity. Thinkers like Cesare Beccaria, whose writings challenged torture's morality, helped spark changes that outlawed such devices in places. Like Prussia and France by the late 1700s, this shift wasn't perfect. Justice systems remained flawed. But it showed society's capacity to evolve. Today, the breast ripper serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of fanaticism and misogyny. Museums and historical studies use it to teach about the consequences of dehumanizing any group, urging us to question systems that justify cruelty. For example, exhibitions in Salzburg's Witch Trial Museum paired the device with survivor stories to highlight resilience and the importance of evidence-based justice. The echoes of this punishment resonate in modern discussions about gender and power. While we no longer use iron claws, societal pressures on women's bodies through shame, control, or judgment persist in subtler forms. The breast ripper reminds us to stay vigilant against any ideology that seeks to punish difference or silence voices. Practically, you can explore this history further by visiting digital archives like those from the University of Heidelberg, which offer translated trial records, or by checking out books like The Witch Hunt in Early Modern Europe, by Brian Levick, for deeper context. These resources bring the past into focus, helping us connect it to today's fights for equality and justice. As we close this series, the breast ripper stands as a grim monument to a dark past, but also a call to action. We've come far, but history warns us to keep questioning, keep learning, and keep fighting for a world where no one faces such horrors again. If this journey through history moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the past, and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. What struck you most about this brutal chapter of history? This story may be over, but its lessons live on, urging us to shape a more humane future.